Hello everyone, I'm Ben Johnson and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. On Perpetual Chess, I have weekly conversations with the chess world's best players, promoters, and educators about their lives, careers, current projects, and best practices. Perpetual Chess is brought to you through the generosity of its Patreon and PayPal supporters. For more information, go to perpetualchesspod.com. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Perpetual Chess Podcast. So I am always excited for my guests, but I have to admit I'm especially excited for this one. Regular listeners will know I'm not one for glowing introductions, but this week's guest is just one of the greatest living writers about chess. He also was an incredible chess player. He's been top 20 in the world. He's been champion of the Netherlands. But our main focus today is Mr. Genna Sosonko's work as an author. He's written 2 books that have come out recently, and in the past he's written classics such as Russian Silhouettes and The World Champions I Knew. But today we're primarily going to be discussing The Rise and Fall of David Bronstein and Evil-Doer, Half a Century of Viktor Korchnoi, which has just come out here in the United States and across the world. So Mr. Sosonko, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm very excited. I mean, I feel like the chess world is so lucky to have someone who, first of all, lived the experiences that you did with having great access and being friends with so many chess legends, but then also for that person to be an incredible writer is just a great gift. So with all of that praise out of the way, let's dive into the book. So I wanted to start.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So I wanted to start with Evil-Doer, Half a Century with Viktor Korchnoi. And before we get into the meat of the book, could you just tell our listeners a little bit how you initially encountered Mr. Korchnoi?
Well, I knew him briefly in late 50s, but actually in the 60s. But actually, we met in 1970 when he asked me to work together in order to prepare for preparation for his match against Geller in 1970 and against Petrosian. I was second of Viktor in his match against Petrosian even. And in this period, in these 2 years, before I left the Soviet Union, before my immigration to the West, we knew each other very well, and we were working almost daily.
Yes, and you write extensively about this in the book, and there's a lot to follow up on from that, but let's start with chess trainer. So in the book, you mentioned that Korchnoi spoke highly of your abilities as a trainer. What was your strength as a chess trainer? What made you a good trainer?
Yeah, it's always difficult to speak about yourself. But when I was 26, 27, when we met and we started to work together, I was a creator of new ideas in the openings, and Viktor knew that because I was working before him with Misha Tal, and he used a couple of my ideas against the matches against Grigorich and against Korchnoi himself. And secondly, I dare say that my understanding of the position was very clear, but maybe the most what I remember from myself from that period, I had a very, very good memory. Nowadays, maybe it's not so important because the computer, the programs, they remember everything, and it's not so important for the seconds, for the trainers to have such a big memory. But I remember myself, I had it. Yeah. Maybe these 3 points were the main points when Viktor asked me to work with him.
Okay, so So you mentioned you're having been an emigre from the USSR to the West. You moved to Holland
in 1972. I moved first to Israel, and I have been in Israel for 2 months. And after that, I left for the West. And I remember I have still now the airplane ticket. Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Paris, was the very first stop in Amsterdam, and since then I'm in Amsterdam.
Yes, and you mentioned again in the book, obviously our listeners will know that that's a big change, moving from one country to another, but could you talk a little bit about the degree of the change? Because I think for younger listeners, it might be hard to contextualize. I understand your question, Ben, perfectly. It's not a big change. It's so enormous a change was, particularly in that time, because the Soviet Union was very close society, very close. Before that, I was 29. I turned 29 when I emigrated from the Soviet Union, but I never been in abroad. Not in so-called capitalist countries, not in the countries of East Europe, or what they called it in the Soviet Union, the socialist countries. So for me, it was not a big difference. It was a difference in all meanings. And I'll tell you that even for Korchnoi, who played in many countries, in United States and in England, in Yugoslavia, in Holland many times. Even for him, when he was 45, the difference was also tremendous, because enormous, and because one thing is to be as a representative of the Soviet Union in a tournament in Vikensee in Holland, for instance. Another thing, to be in the West, to live in the West permanently. And in my opinion, Korchnoi, or Spassky, who, by the way, was living in the West for 40 years, and now he returned to Russia, they couldn't never make the regulations, the rules, the mentality from the West in his life. And that's what I'm thinking about, Viktor, and about emigration. Because emigration in now, for the young players, what you mentioned, is just buy a ticket and to fly from Moscow to New York, from Moscow to play a game in the Bundesliga in Germany. Mm-hmm. It's a question of flying 3 hours from Moscow or St. Petersburg to Dortmund, let's say, or to New York for 11 hours. It's a question of time and money, not more than that. In that time, we are speaking about 45 years ago, it was completely different business. Right, and you would also be totally cutting off contact with your friends and family from your prior life. So, yeah. Absolutely. Well, don't forget that we are speaking about time when internet didn't exist, when my letters to the Soviet Union took at least 2 weeks. And if they got my letters, if they were happy to get my letters, it was 2 weeks. So it was no connection, and telephone calls, first of all, were extremely expensive, and secondly, you might wait for hours and hours and hours. So it was completely different world in all meanings. Yes, and if you don't mind discussing it, were your reasons for leaving the Soviet Union, were they primarily political or professional, or is it too hard to?
No, it's not too hard. I more than that. First of all, I was thinking about leaving that country, Soviet Union, because I didn't like that country, And it was, well, combined, well, you can combine these reasons, what you mentioned, political, well, partly, professional, also partly. I just had a feeling it's enough. I like to see the world, and if I don't will do it now, I will forever stay in that country, because the feeling that the Soviet Union is built for centuries, it was present for everybody. Nobody could expect what happened 20 years after that.
Right. And for listeners, in the book about Korchnoi, Mr. Sosonko here describes in great detail not just leaving, but the process required to leave. So like telling Korchnoi about it and stuff like that. So we'll leave that for people when they buy the book and read it. You can enjoy that part. But Mr. Sosonko, could you tell us, or Genna, sorry, I know you mentioned you prefer to be called.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Could you tell us?
You forced me to call you Mr. Johnson.
It doesn't seem like a fair trade, but okay.
We can do it. We can do it. Yeah. We can speak also Russian if you prefer, Ben.
Oh, Nimnoshka.
No. It's okay. It's okay. All right.
So, what was it like professionally to start over in Holland? What were the first steps to strike as a chess professional in the Netherlands?
Very good. It's a good question. Yes. When I left the Soviet Union, I didn't have any points of ELO, not at all. And nobody knew my name. And of course, in a matter of fact, I was stronger than, 2,300 or 2,400. I think I was just about 2,400. But I started to play in Holland in the open tournaments. And I won all of them, but all of them. And with Donner and Timman at that time, the best Dutch players, and don't mention the Dutch masters. And I remember the very first tournament in Holland, and really tournament, was a tournament of the best Dutch masters of Hans Reer and Frans Kuipers and Van Scheltinga and all others. And I won all 5 games. I won all of them. And in the matter of fact, I was forced to win all games, to show, to survive, if you like. And when I got an invitation for the Dutch Championship in 1973, I was forced also to win the championship as well. I tied for the first third place in that time, and I won tie break. And the Soviets, they didn't know how to react at. And my mother sent me one of the sport newspapers when it was written that in the chess championship of Holland in 1973, the third place was tied by, and I mentioned 2 Dutch names and not mention my name. So it's also difficult to understand for youngsters of our days how it was in that time. And I have to admit that feeling that my name was forbidden for printing, for publishing in the Soviet Union gave me an extra, what I dare say, stimulus or
motivation.
You understand what I mean? Motivation. That's right. To play and to achieve more and more.
That's incredible, and there's so many little details. I mean, you mentioned these incredible achievements you had in the chess tournaments, but I mean, here you were on your own. Did you speak any Dutch when you lived there? Did you know anyone there?
No. Well, only language. I could speak a little bit was French, but because I learned French at school and university, and a little, but of course no practice. And I didn't speak any language and any Dutch, and I learned Dutch from the kids of the publisher of the Schaak Bulletin, one of the chess chess magazines in Holland. While I was staying in his home and was writing for that magazine, so I learned Dutch and unfortunately English also only by listening, and well, that's all.
Well, I mean, it's incredible that you've managed. I'm sure you speak Dutch well too, and now you speak English so well, and to have not picked it up.
Well, my Dutch is, of course, is much better than my English because, well, I make a lot of mistakes in English. I admit it, and I understand it perfectly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, you wrote in the book that leaving the USSR for good strengthened your character and gave you the right outlook on life. Could you elaborate a little bit on how it did that?
Say it again, please.
You wrote in the book that leaving the USSR for good strengthened your character and that it gave you the right outlook on life. So I was just curious, like, what sort of outlook you got from that whole experience.
All right. The Soviet Union in that time and all times was a country when you had to follow what the state says to you, to orders you. And when I became a citizen of Holland, of citizen of the world, if you like, I myself and only me had to decide what to do, how to do, and not only in the terms of accepting invitation, playing simultan, but no, my life depends on myself. And I remember that in 1973, when I was staying a couple of weeks in Amsterdam, one of the people I knew that I asked me, would you like to maybe to work as a teacher of Russian for the students, for the students who finished their studies at the university, and instead of 1 year to go to army, they studied Russian, the language of the eventually enemy, and to be a teacher at this courses or whatever. I said, of course, because I didn't really know what to do. I was not absolutely sure that I will be a chess player, what chess player, whom chess player. And I said, okay. And I remember that in 1973, before I won the Dutch, my very first Dutch championship, the Colonel Janssen called me a Dutchman and spoke with me a long time. And he said, I have seen your biography and was written by yourself, and somebody will be retired, and we would like to have you as a teacher. And so it was a possibility for me to turn my life completely different direction. And this kind of possibilities I had in the West not one time, and definitely if I accept his invitation. And I remember he told me, you understand, if you are working for us, your naturalization, you're getting the Dutch passport will be much easier, and you will understand that all Medicars, all other things will be, don't speak about your salary, will be much higher than you earn it now as a chess player. And actually he asked me what it means to be a chess player. And I remember very well what I answered. I told him, Mr. Janssen, thank you very much for your kind words, but somehow my hobby became a profession now. And so I will follow my way. And a couple of years, maybe in 2015, when I looked at my old visit cards and introduction cards, and I've seen the card of Colonel Janssen, I couldn't remember how I know this man. And then I remember this conversation from 45 years ago. And definitely, if I accepted at that time this invitation, I could be completely another person, and which another, I don't know. Better or worse, I don't know. Only one thing I know, we will never get this conversation and this interview with you, Ben. If you know what I mean.
Right. Yes, yeah. Right. So I'm certainly glad things worked out the way they did. And I'm amazed how well you remember all these details. It was very clear in your writing as well. There's just like so many details from so long ago, and just hearing you speak about the experience of immigrating.
Yeah, that's what we started with, namely my memory from that time, and some parts of the memory maybe I have still now.
So are you a journaler? Did you take notes, or do you just remember the events?
Well, it's a good question. Well, I started to make notes actually when I decided to write about David Bronstein, because the conversations we had, it was not actually conversations. It was mostly big monologues of himself, with just a couple of, remarks of mine, like, really, David? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. So and then I was thinking, if I will not make notes, it will be gone forever. And actually, in that time, I think it was very first years after Perestroika. I'm speaking about 1992, 1993, 1994, and so on, when I started to make notes during his monologues, if you like, or our conversations.
Yeah, and that brings to mind another question. In the Bronstein book, which we'll discuss a little bit later, you mention in the book that he basically knew that you would be writing about him, and sometimes he would allude to it. But in the Korchnoi book, it wasn't as clear to me. So do you think, as a well-known chess writer, do you think that Grandmaster Korchnoi also had a sense that you would be writing about your experiences with him?
As Bronstein, we never spoke about that, but he read my books, and he understood in nature of my questions that I will be right about him. I do not know if David would be happy with the book I wrote about him. I do not know, because I tried to explain his motives, his temper, his Jewishness, if you like, his tremendous talent, and so on and so on, and that's one thing. So we never spoke about the fact that I will ever write about him, but actually I'm almost sure that deep in his soul he understood that I will do it. Korchnoi knew for sure that I will do it, and we spoke directly, or not directly, many times about it. More than that, in one of the books he gave me, he wrote that for Genna Sosonko, for the Nestor of our chess world, and from one of the person whom he definitely will be right in the future. It was just a couple of it was in 1990. It was in the year when he turned 80, and it was in 2011. It was in Zurich, and he gave me his book. Another time, I remember that also typical Viktor. It was the Chess Olympiad in Bled in Slovenia, and I was a captain of Dutch team, and he was playing for Switzerland, and he it was a match when he didn't play, and he said, I would like to speak with you, and I came to the match of Holland against I can't remember which country, and he came to my room, and first what he said, because you're executor of my will, I would like to tell you something, and this term, executor of my will, he used a couple of other times, but in that time I was very upset. I was waiting what Viktor will tell me, something, a big secret, something especially, something so important in his life that only him knew that. And I was just silent. And he said, come to the chessboard and sit down, please, he said. Look at the position. In this position, and he showed me a variation which is, in his opinion, was very playable and not so bad how it was in the old chess books written about this variation. That's so the executor of his will was, in his opinion, also, everything was in his eyes was went through the chess. Chess was much more important than all other secrets, all other happenings in his life. Well, I was not so maybe clear in my explanation, but your next question, what was chess in his life, Genna?
Yes. No, it is, because you wrote, one of the questions I had brainstormed was, you mentioned, like, especially towards his later years, you mentioned how his other interests kind of fell by the wayside, and that even into his 70s, when he was still competing regularly, all he thought about was chess. And I was wondering, as someone who knew so many legendary chess players, was there anyone else like that, or was he kind of unique?
No, he was unique. He was unique, and you said what other interests in his life, but chess, I dare say. Of course, well, he was a normal person, and when he was young, he was playing cards, girls and women, and afterwards, family, his son. But the distance between the very first place in his life, chess, and all others' interests were so tremendous, and I can not to compare anybody with Viktor Korchnoi from the past, and even Tal, for whom chess was a lot, but for him was also many other interests in life. But from the past, I can't compare Viktor with nobody. from our times only with Vasily Ivanchuk, for whom chess is also number one and everything in his life. Why is it so? I do not know, but it's. We are coming we have to look at his. I'm speaking now about Korchnoi in his childhood, in the siege of Leningrad, and of all of his Soviet upbringing and education, and about his genes and and about everything. But anyway, that I did not know anybody in the chess world for whom chess meant so much as for Viktor Korchnoi. And that even during our dinners, even during our walkings, even during conversation about anything else, sometimes he looked at me and I understood that he was thinking about the variation of the position with stop to analyze and so on and so on. I think that's also one of the explanations of his big chess career, big successes, is that he was thinking permanently about chess, and you can compare him with, let's say, G.P. Morgan when he was asked the secret of his wealth. He simply replied that he thought incessantly about money day and night and about nothing else. And Viktor Korchnoi thought incessantly about chess.
So
you can compare it with Bill Shankly, the legendary manager of Liverpool, that he said, he was asked what somebody said, football's a matter of life and death to you. Is it correct? And he said, listen, it's more important.
Right.
It's more important that. And it was also said that if Liverpool weren't playing, he would go to watch their Merseyside rivals, Everton. If they weren't playing either, he would head to Manchester, and so on and so on. So if he was not playing chess tournaments, I'm speaking about Viktor, he was analyzing, studying, and so on and so on. And I remember I spoke with one of his friends from his childhood, from Leningrad, from 1947, when Viktor was only 16, and the guy came to him and to ask him to analyze together one enjoying position. And after 3 hours, when the guy was completely exhausting, and he said, "Thank you very much, Viktor, now I'm going home." He said, "What? We didn't look even at half of the variations in this position." Okay, it's your business, it's your position. So he was ready to analyze further and further and further. And that's, of course, together with his tremendous talent and terrible will to win the game. And that was one of the main reasons of his tremendous successes.
Okay, well, there's so much I just want to add a little detail to about all those incredible, all those stories and details you just shared. One of them is for listeners who haven't read Genna's work, you can see why he's such a great writer. I mean, he's pulling in soccer references, J.P. Morgan quotes. So unlike Korchnoi, you can see that he's a well-read individual with able to draw on a lot of things in his writing. And following up on the Ivanchuk point, I found that interesting as the person that you had mentioned, because he, of course, famously missed the Olympiad in 2016 because of a droughts tournament. That doesn't strike me as something that Korchnoi would have done.
No, that's a good question. Well, in this case, in the case of Ivanchuk, my explanation is that he feels himself a little bit uncomfortable with the young players because, well, he will turn 50 just in half a year. And by the way, today is 18. In 6 days' time, Boris Gelfand will turn 50. So Ivanchuk will be 50. And, well, he's in one team with young guys. And he's not Vasya, a young boy. Well, he feels himself like a young boy, I suppose. But the young, his colleagues from the team, for them, Vasily is Vasily Mikhailovich, and my explanation is that he feels himself a little bit uncomfortable in this situation. And as far as I know, and as far as I remember, and I remember very well, that Vladimir Tukmakov, who was the captain of Ukrainian team for the previous Olympiads, he told me that Vasily came never to the meetings of the team, and well, he spoke with him separately, or he will be played next day or not. So I think that's the explanation of why Vasily didn't play the very last Olympiad. And as far as I know, in 97 days time, when the Olympiad in Batumi will start, Vasily Ivanchuk is in the team of Ukraine, and but we are a little bit far from our ears from Bronstein and from Korchnoi We.
Yes, we are. Although, like you, I'm counting the days to the Olympiad. Well, to tie it back to Korchnoi, you mentioned in the book Ivanchuk and Golko both had a chance to study with Korchnoi when those two were younger men, and that they were just blown away by the experience. Do you have any detail? I mean, you already told that one story of just Korchnoi's work ethic, where after 3 hours he's just getting warmed up. But so, what was it that was so impressive for these young players about working with Grandmaster Korchnoi?
I spoke with Gelfand about it and about how Korchnoi impressed you and how did you work with him. He said, first of all, it's a passion for chess, and you could feel it, this passion, that even in the what I write about it, even the solution of the position was founded, and they understand that in this position they can stop and make a conclusion that white is better, the plans are clear, and to start to analyze another position. So it could happen with anybody but Korchnoi. Then he started. Shall we start to analyze this position from another point? Because there are another plans in this position, and as far as I know, only Paul Keres, who loved chess also tremendously, and he also analyzed in the same way. So, after finding one truth, I dare say, he started to try to find another possibility, and another possibility, and another possibility, and that was typical for Viktor. So the young players, the representatives for young generation, Gelfand, Ivanchuk, and others, they were very impressed by this this way of analyzing. So it was not a way that you're looking, you watch, and now it's 6:45. It's the right time to stop, to have a dinner, to look at soccer match, Belgium against Panama, which is now almost finished, by the way, but it's another question, and so on and so on. He was completely in the analysis in the chess, and this passion and this obsession, if you like, they could feel it, and that was very typical for Viktor. And what I am writing in the book, that 3 times champion of United States, Lev Albert and Yasser Seirawan, when they started to work together with Korchnoi, Albert was 34, Yasser was 21, and Albert said that we were working by turns with Korchnoi. First me a couple of hours, then Yasser a couple of hours, then again me, again, and so on and so on. But Korchnoi was working and analyzing in a game of chess permanently.
It
was 1980, so Korchnoi was about 1980, 50. He was 50.
Well,
yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, as a World Cup fan, I want to thank you for being willing to record this great interview during the Panama match, as you alluded to. And getting back to Korchnoi, I feel like in a few minutes we should move on to Bronstein. But I feel like we've fleshed out the one major character trait of Korchnoi as a chess player, which is just his incredible work ethic and love for chess. But we wouldn't be giving him a proper treatment if we also didn't talk, especially in his later years, about sort of his personality was known to be a bit prickly. I mean, people had great experiences with him, but I know that when he passed, there were friends of mine who've gotten to play him who started sharing stories on Facebook about things he said after a game that were a bit not sportsmanlike, let's say. So, do you have any stories, like favorite stories of that vein about his competitive spirit and how he interacted, how he dealt with losing?
Yeah, well, actually, the story I introduced to chess world about 25 years ago when Mikhail died, and I like this story very much. And it's also typical Viktor, and this is a story which was told to me by Mikhail. And it's a story about a chess Olympiad on Cuba in Havana in 1966. And after the Olympiad, the grandmasters were asked to play simultaneous exhibitions to some on 20, 25 boards, can't remember. And before Viktor's simultaneous exhibition, he was asked, you know what, Viktor, the Che Guevara, he loves chess so much. Please, if you will make a draw with him, he will be really very, 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 very happy. And by the way, Korchnoi played, Che Guevara played against Korchnoi 3 times in the simultaneous exhibitions. And Misha told me that, he was a witness of this conversation, and Korchnoi said something. Yeah. We will see. Okay. Remember. Yeah. And when a couple of hours later, when he came back and returned to the hotel, the same evening he was in great mood, and Tal asked him, and I stuffed them, all of them. Nobody could ever draw with me. And what about Che? You remember Viktor Che Guevara. I starved him too. He doesn't have a clue how to play the catalog. And that's what I like also. And, when I told this story to Victor himself, well, he laughed and he said, well, I can't remember how it was literally. Very possible. Very, yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that was one of my favorite stories from the book. It's just hilarious, and really shines a light on Mr. Korchnoi's personality. So I think we should move on to Grandmaster Bronstein, but just a quick plug in between, and I'll be doing this again. So listeners, you get the picture. You need to buy and enjoy these books. I mean, we're really just scratching the surface of everything that's covered in these books, but we do need to move forward to Grandmaster Bronstein. So what was your initial encounter with him? How did you get to know David Bronstein?
Yeah, David. Before my immigration from the Soviet Union, well, actually, we said hello to each other on some championships of the Soviet Union, of some tournaments, maybe a couple of us, but not more than that. And I met him first in Hastings in 1975 and 1976. Korchnoi, Bronstein, and Taimanov came to Hastings to play Hastings, and it was in that time a really very strong tournament of 16 players and so on, and Bronstein was among them. And I spoke very often with Bronstein, and again, if me or anybody else will say I spoke with Bronstein, it's not completely correctly. It was a very long dialogue of Bronstein himself, and with just a couple of remarks of myself, of anybody. He was a teller stories and not a listener. At that time, he represented, of course, the Soviet Union, and but we in Hastings, it was not a chief of delegation and not a KGB man, and so he was more or less open for conversation. However, when I asked him at that time, would you like David to write a book of Solzhenitsyn, because the Gulag Archipel was published just a couple of months before I left for Holland to England, he said, no. I know everything what your Solzhenitsyn wrote. Because my father was in Gulag, and I know from anything. No. And he was a little bit afraid of that. And actually, I start to know and to start to really speak with him and to contact him after the perestroika, after 1991, when he was free to leave Soviet Union and then Russia when he liked to, and when he was a couple of years was living in Spain, in Belgium. He was also in Holland a couple of months, and I met him regularly, and we spoke regularly. And when I came to Moscow, I was many times in his home near the chess club on Gogolovsky Boulevard in Moscow, and we spoke of this and of that. And what I mentioned already, I make notes of his conversation, rather than how do you call it, to use cassette recorder, dictaphone, and because he didn't like, he preferred so to speak freely about this and about that, and actually a week before he died, maybe 2 weeks, I spoke with him on phone. He was in Minsk, where he spent last years of his life. Of course, that he was married with the daughter of Boleslavsky, his colleague and his friend, who came from Belarus. And so that actually I knew him very well after Perestroika's time.
Okay, and you paint a very vivid picture of Grandmaster Bronstein in the book, and you mentioned his proclivity for talking with without necessarily it being a two-way conversation. But you also talk a lot about one of the great what-ifs in chess history, his match with Botvinnik. Could you give our listeners just a little taste of the impact that this famous defeat had on him?
No, first of all, he was really a genius of chess, and to combine two eras, Viktor Korchnoi and David Bronstein, I remember that once I asked Viktor about Bronstein, and I asked him, Viktor, you remember Bronstein from the 50s. Could you could you call him a genius? Genius, he said. Well, no. Could you call him an outstanding player? And then he said he was a genius. And what a genius! A genius is somebody is ahead of his time, and Bronstein was far ahead of his time. If Botvinnik said that Bronstein was very, very strong when he was the opening, was making and transition to the middle game, then that is a very weak statement. In reality, at that point in the game, Bronstein demonstrated many ideas that were complete revelations. That's the sign of a genius. He understood the game better than anyone from 1945 through 1951. And, Ben, what this quotation of Korchnoi with such of, compliments and such of high quality of somebody also very remarkable, particularly from Korchnoi, about Bronstein, and it speaks for itself. And that's typical for that time. And when Petrosian said that the young players think that the theory of chess started with Informator, that is Yugoslavian theory book of all games from the, let's say, end of the last century. We, the generation of 40s and 50s and 60s, we know that the theory, modern chess theory, started from David Bronstein. And also this quotation from Petrosian also says a lot of the role of genius of David Bronstein. Well, his match against Botvinnik, it's just a special story, and I'm writing in the book about David that in his permanently ideas that what do you think? I didn't see the move whom I could make a draw in the 23rd game. Do you think so? I didn't see that move. Do you? And he permanently came back to this idea. It was a part of truth that somewhere in his soul he didn't want to win this game, and I think sometimes how the chess history could be if Bronstein won that match beat Botvinnik, and Bronstein will be the world champion for the next 3 years, and who knows, maybe for another 3 years, and so on and so on. Now, first of all, the life of Bronstein himself, will change enormously. I'm sure it was 1951, they will force him to be a member of Communist Party. They will force him to make some statements about this terrible American, I'm sorry, but imperialists, and so on, and so on, and so on. And they will change his mind anyway, if he will resist it or not. But not only that, the chess history will be completely different. How different, I don't know, but it's only hypothetical questions, of course.
Right. Yeah. And who knows? I mean, because as you talk about in the book, he had sort of a victim's mentality from that point onward. And if he were the world champion, maybe he would have carried himself differently and been able to carry that momentum forward and utilize all the talent that you spoke about.
Very possible. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And I like the quote from the book where you quoted Bronstein saying that it cost him 2 titles. Not winning the world champion cost him the title of champion and ex-champion, which is also also obviously quite a title in its own right.
Yeah, also typical sentence of Bronstein, a little bit sophisticated, a little bit tricky, a little bit, very typical for him. Well, I'm speaking about his losing of his title of the world champion and ex-world champion. Yeah. Well, it's by the way, there's a difference between Bronstein and Tal. When Tal lost his rematch against Botvinnik, he said, well, maybe it's also not so bad. I will be the most ex-world champion of the world in the chess history. And David said, well, I lost 2 titles, this. And actually, David Bronstein proved to be Tal's precursor. That's forerunner. That's well, the Tal, the phenomenon of Tal would be impossible without David Bronstein, without his games, without his ideas, without his all Bronstein as a chess player and personality. It was a fundament for creating of Tal's style. And don't forget that the King's Indian, the opening, which for the West Masters and Grandmasters was just very suspicious of, even more than that, not correct at all, was introduced by David Bronstein. And however, when he was dying and after the stroke, and when his wife asked him just to check his memory, what is your name? What is the name of Botvinnik? And he called him Misha. Well, just a short name, which he never did. And on the question, who played the King's Indian best in the world? He said, Geller. And however, he knew very well that he was a creator of this opening. And Geller and all other Soviet grandmasters, Leonid Stein and others, they learned how to manage the King's Indian defense from David Bronstein.
the book is more about his life. It's not a collection of games, but it definitely inspired me as a, okay chess player, but nothing incredible. I haven't done the deep dive that his games deserve, so that's something I'd like to do. And he was also known as a chess writer. Genna, here on the podcast, our listeners love chess books, and they're always looking for recommendations. And of course, one that's come up many times is Zurich 1953. But of course, you provide some detail that hadn't been provided elsewhere about Zurich 1953, for which Bronstein has the byline. Could you discuss what he said about that book?
Well, he said a couple of times to me, if you write, don't forget, I hate that book. I hate that book because it's not mine. It's Weinstein, my second and my mentor, told me, shall we write the beautiful book about Zurich tournament, David. And actually he wrote a literary part of the book, and I myself only gave a couple of analyses and so on. I think, in my opinion, that the kind of, let's say, in French, coquetry of Bronstein. You understand what I mean?
I don't.
No. He was a coquette in French. A coquette.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, a little bit, kidding a little bit, sort of.
Yeah, precisely. Well, exactly, yeah. Well, yeah. And I don't think that, he hated that book, but he, the connection somehow with Weinstein, maybe he didn't like. He didn't like that. Okay, I will compare one thing. Conan Doyle, he didn't like the questions about Sherlock Holmes. And he said, always, what are you speaking about? I am the author not only for Sherlock Holmes. And he mentioned the books he wrote, but nobody knew already that books. More than that, nobody knew at that time that books which Conan Doyle looked as his better books than Sherlock Holmes. Comparing with David Bronstein, he didn't like the old questions and all compliments of his book of Zurich tournament because of the same feeling, I dare say, namely, I'm not only the author of that book, I'm also author of all other books, and I'm also a big philosopher, and I'm also a big chess player. And these feelings, what in my opinion was also very clear presented when he said, I hated the book.
Huh. But so that's interesting, and it does shed some light into his unique personality, to put it diplomatically.
Well, absolutely unique, and in all meanings of the word. You know what Botvinnik was creation of all things of his Jewishness, of his Soviet, existence, of his friendship with the colonel of KGB, and who was his mentor. He was creation of the fact that his father was in Gulag. He was a creation of all details, complexes, which was very typical for the Soviet era, and that was all David Bronstein. And the fact that in 1991 he got finally the freedom, it was very dangerous freedom for him, because for somebody who was all his life was thinking about, and he was afraid about this and about that, and don't say that, and don't say that. And suddenly he was an half a dissident, only at home, and suddenly he could say everything what he liked to. And believe me, and we started with the phenomenon of emigration. And his phenomenon was even more difficult for him on first place. And it creates even more complexes in his life. One example, in the open tournament in London, I can't remember now. Well, I said, I have a memory. I can't remember the open tournament in London in 90s, the name of the sponsor, and no, I can't remember. 90s, it was in London was every year very strong tournament. Doesn't matter. He was playing many times, and before the game, he put the flag of Russia on his board. And on his table, I mean, near his board, and also the Russian flag was on his suit coat, and so it's how he hated this regime. He hated what happened afterwards, and still it's a combination of patriotism and combination of other feelings to Soviet Union than to Russia. What also, kind of him, of a complicated person, which was David Bronstein. Yeah.
So a couple of things I wanted to follow up on, both from the book and from what you've been mentioning. One was the sort of overhang of the KGB in the Soviet Union. So could you try to give our listeners a sense of what that was like? I mean, obviously this is a topic that goes way beyond chess, but what was their relation to the chess world?
With the KGB?
Yeah.
KGB was, maybe still is, under another name, the main power in the Soviet Union. And by the way, I am writing about KGB and chess.
Oh, that's great news.
Chess school, Russian Soviet chess school, and relations. Actually, your question. In my new book, which will be published this year, about Vasily Smyslov, because in the year 2001, David Bronstein published in '64 the Russian Chess magazine an open letter to Smyslov. Vasily Vasilyevich, would you like to tell us about fixing games in Zurich tournament? And he told a couple of stories about it, what I'm writing about everything. And then the answer in the next magazine of Smyslov about how it was and how Bronstein was got a lot of benefits from the Soviets and so on and so on. And then Bronstein writes in his open letter that the KGB man who was speaking with him before the game against Smyslov, who was leading in the tournament, and Bronstein had white pieces against Smyslov, and the chief of KGB delegation spoke with Bronstein and told him, now David, now you have to make you must make draw against Smyslov, because Smyslov fighting against fighting for the winning of this tournament, and he was fighting against not somebody, but this American. I'm very sorry, but again. and so in that time and like now, by the way, to be American meant it was the meaning of automatically to fighting against enemy, and when Bronstein said, but I have white. He said to the chief of the delegation, KGB man named Morshantsev. He said, I have white, and I have chances myself if I will beat Smyslov. And then this guy Morshantsev said, listen, do you really think we came to here to play chess? To play chess? Do you think really? And actually, that is the quintessence of the chess in the Soviet Union, and the relations between KGB, or in large meaning KGB plus the state, Central Committee of the Communist Party. Chess, like everything in the Soviet Union, was of the political part of all big agitprop, agitation and propaganda for the best way of living, the Soviets' way of living.
So I gather the game was a draw?
and the game was a draw, and Bronstein writes also about conversation between the same Morshantsev and Bondarevsky, by the way, who was also in this delegation, and they tried to say the same things to Keres. You must make draw to Smyslov with white pieces, by the way, and because Smyslov, who was by the way leading in the tournament, and with 1.5 point difference with sometimes with Rishevsky, sometimes with Keres of Bronstein, but he was leading and he was playing very well, Smyslov. And when Morshantsev told Keres, now you have Paul Petrovich, you have to make a draw with Smyslov, he said no. And he tried many hours to tell him, no, that's your duty, and so on. Keres said no, he refused. And when he came to play to his game to Smyslov, Keres was very upset. You can imagine that the people they try to force you to make a draw, and so your brains not on the weak pawns and king's attack or somewhere else, and he created a very bizarre attack against Smyslov, and he lost Keres. So that it's actually nobody forced to lose to Smyslov, but they tried to create the best chances for him in a candidate tournament in Zurich, and actually Bronstein published this everything in the year 2001. Almost half a century after that that tournament. Yeah.
Wow, those are great stories. If not uplifting. So, do you think that basically every tournament every tournament where top level Soviet players were playing, the KGB had a hand in, or only things sort of the stature of the candidates?
No. Well, not KGB. Well, I mean that with all Olympiads, all European championships, all world championships, the chief of the delegation was always a KGB man, and everybody knew it. And before every round was a meeting of the team, and they discussed it because this KGB man was not a big chess player, not at all. On the contrary, it was not necessary for him. Maybe he couldn't even play chess, but he knew very well that tomorrow is Karpov is playing against United States of America. It was on the Olympiad on Malta. On the very first board for United States is Lev Albert, and a defector from the Soviet Union, and Anatoly must not shake the hand with the traitor, with the renegade, with the and so on, and this kind of business was discussed. And I am writing again about these methods of the Soviets. It was a routine methods. It was not only KGB, but imagine that the chess in the Soviet Union was a very important part of agitation, very important part of propaganda. And in the United States, Chess Federation, it's a just organization, not more than that. But in the Soviet Union, it was a kind of very, very, very important part of Soviet life, and the part of the Central Committee of the Communist Party was responsible for this. And not only shaking hands, but what to do with another people who left Soviet Union legally, like Sosonko. Shall we speak with Sosonko, or he's also half traitor? And this kind of business, this kind of questions, and again, it was also very important that the question, boys, tomorrow we are playing, again, I'm very sorry, Ben, against United States of America, and it's more than important match. Fatherland is looking at you. And we are expecting, you understand, we are expecting from you. Only God, we have to beat these Yankees. We have to beat these bastards. And it was, well, I'm not, it's not a, well, it was, and I'm afraid still.
Okay. That's okay. Yeah, so I feel like our listeners
quite yeah.
Our listeners will now have it's so hard for I think younger listeners and people in the United States to imagine what it must have been like, because it just, as you said, it hung over everything, and of course it impacted Soviet players, but also impacted their competition.
I give you another example. 1953, a tournament in Bucharest, in Romania. And it's the very first international tournament for Boris Spassky, who just turned 16. And in that tournament was playing not only Spassky, it was playing many Soviet grandmasters: Smyslov, Tolus, Borislavsky, Petrosian, maybe somebody else, I can't remember, maybe only 5. And in the beginning of the tournament, By the way, there was the tournament when Spassky became international master. At that time, the title of the international master was something special. It was and the winner of the pianist musical concours, and it was and Boris became international master, and they started the tournament. He started the tournament, Spassky, was beating Smyslov, and Smyslov was beating Tolus. Tolus was beating Petrosian, and in this moment, told Boris me once, they got a telegram, a cable from Moscow. Please stop this rubbish. Please don't beat each other. Only draws with each other, that's order. And Spassky admitted, for me was it very good, because I had to play against Petrosian, I had to play against Bolislavsky, top grandmasters, and I was only a boy. And they make draws against me, and I beat before Smyslov already. So I make only profit from this, cable from Moscow. Well, it is just of example of many others which was in solitaire.
Yeah, that's incredible. I wish. I'm sure you have many more stories that I would love to hear, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I just have, I think, one more question on Bronstein, and then a couple general, if you're up for it.
It's okay.
Okay, so with Bronstein, you mentioned in the book that he had an incredible memory. He just remembered games from like 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely.
So how unique was that to him as compared to the other top chess players that you spent time with?
Tal remembered very well. I don't think that Korchnoi was. Sometimes he even asked me, or even during, did I play that? No. But Bronstein was unique, but not particularly unique. Among other players. No. Well, he got very very good memory, and I like to say that. Well, more than chess memory, he was a memory of elephant, who remembers everybody who tried to make him angry, or to give him. Well, I became a little bit tired, so I can't find this English word. Whom create him. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like a list of people who criticized him.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, yeah. Yes, exactly. Who criticized him. That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it there with David Bronstein. But again, I encourage listeners to read this book. It's not uplifting. I mean, it's an incredible detail on a genius of chess. But yeah, he was not happy in his older days, and that was when you spent a lot of time with him. But just a great piece of chess history and a very enjoyable read. So again, just to finish up, if we could talk a little bit more broadly about the chess world and your experience. So one question I always like to ask about is favorite chess books. So do you have any present company? Excluding yourself, do you have any favorite books of all?
Oh, yeah, that's definitely the best.
Well, I agree.
The book I will write. Yeah, I will writing now, that's about Smyslov and about these stories about chess, Soviet chess school. It's been all of that. Yeah, okay. No. Yeah. But my favorite chess book, it's a chess book, I'm afraid, unknown in the West. And it was also favorite chess book of Mikhail, and that is the chess book almost for beginners of his trainer and also good friend of mine is Alexander Koblenz. And he was very first trainer of Misha Tal, and a very bright personality. And he wrote a book, School of Chess, which was published in Riga, in his hometown, and published very well hardcover and big diagrams and very clear explanation and explanations. And I liked this book very much, and I was very glad when I somewhere I have seen that Tal said it's also my favorite book. Alexander Koblenz, actually, Chess School.
Okay, that's one that we have not heard before. So I know we have some listeners. If you're a chess fan, a lot of our listeners, I mean, just by accident, have picked up a little Russian, or at least willing to wade into Russian books. So I'm sure a few people will be scouring the internet trying to find this book.
Yeah.
So one last question. You mentioned the Olympiad countdown. You're looking forward to that, and of course, we have the World Championship later this year. Do you still manage to follow modern chess closely?
Oh yes. I follow all big tournaments, and you know what? Speaking between us, Ben, I have to admit that when I will get the chess magazines, I got actually two, namely New Chess and 64 Russian. I, rather than the articles about tournaments which are finished, let's say 1 month ago, or the other articles, I try to solve the tasks made in 2, made in 3,
right,
or they found the best move and try to find the best move. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe it's well typical for the chess players in age, so they're getting like children, you know. When they in the times when they started to play chess and to started to think. But I'm following all tournaments, and I will be also. I hope to be in the Olympiad in Batumi in 3 months' time. Well, and so on. Yeah. Well, yeah. They asked me, by the way, to come in 2 days' time to Minsk. It will be a rapid tournament memorial of Viktor Korchnoi, who died 2 years ago. Unfortunately, I cannot. But so that's I'm involved in the chess world, and our days is not so difficult comparing with old times, because you can follow online everything. You can speak and discuss with your friends, colleagues, this or that chess topics. So I'm following that. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, I'm glad that you're following it, and that you're managing, like, that you'll get to go to the Olympiad and events like that. So I just in closing, I just want to thank you again. This has been an incredible privilege for me, and I think again our listeners will love to hear all these stories. And please, listeners, you must support this man. Please buy these books. You won't regret it. They're great reads, and we can't wait for the Smyslov book either.
Yeah. Okay. It will be soon, and by the same publishing house, Elkan Ruby, and I think that this will be this year.
Yes. And just thanks to Ilan Rubin, since you mentioned it, publisher of Elkan Ruby. Thanks so much for arranging this. They've got so many great chess books, so really appreciate that he's helping make sure that these books get seen and read.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Mr. Sosonko, this has been an absolute pleasure. If you ever want to come on and tell more stories, you would obviously be welcome. But for now, we'll let you get back to the World Cup and relaxing and all that good stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and bye-bye.
The new Perpetual Chess theme music is courtesy of Geert Vanderveld. Special shout out to him. I also want to thank everyone who supports the podcast. That includes people who tell their friends about it, people who write positive reviews on Apple Podcasts, and most of all, those who have donated to support the show. I spend about 5 hours a week on each episode, and even though I love doing it, it can be hard to find the time. Without the support of my Patreon and PayPal Perpetual Chess partners, the show would not be possible. They are Adam Ralph, Adam Vrancoulge, Adrian Gutierrez, Andres Krizdewa, I hope I did okay there, Andres, on your name, Alex Pejas, Chris Wainscott, Chad Hilton, Chris Lott, Christopher Wood, Coach Jay's Chess Academy, Chris Flanagan, Daniel Naylor, Daniel Schaefer, Gary Andrews, Greg Shahadi, James Bonastia, Jason Dunbar, Jennifer Valens, Jeffrey Martello, John Fernandez, Jen Shahadi, Jens Green, Jerry Wells, John Thompson, Johnny McMenamin, Kelly Palmer, Krishna Gopala Krishnan, Lorraine Dore, Matthew Passy, Macaulay Peterson, Matthew Tedesco, Pascal Charbonneau, Paul Sweeney, Peter Lux, Peter Merrifield, Randy Tempo, Ricky Grijalva, Rob Lazorchak, Robert Steiner, Tatya Abrahamian, Thomas Stanix, Thomas Tachenko, Tim Seymour, Timothy Ha, Todd Bryant, Tony Rotello, Viktor Vrancoulge, Zhao Cheng, and Zhivko Stoyanov. Thanks a lot, everyone. I'll be back next week with another great